Welcome to I Do What I Do, where we explore how and why folks do what they do to forge their path and create fulfilling, squiggly careers. I'm Zara Bartels, once a dancer, now a creative operator. And in this first season, we're in London, once my home for many years. So whether you're an aspiring entrepreneur, a creative soul, or just curious about what makes people tick, have a listen. You'll be inspired to do what you do better. Let's go. All right. So, without further ado, we are starting.
All right.
Arthur Kyeyune, a.k.a. The Dog. And now that's real. Isn't that wild?
I'm nearly there.
That's so crazy. But welcome to I Do What I Do. And thank you so very much for doing this. I'm so excited to talk to you.
It's a pleasure. This is a pleasure.
So we're going to talk about you and your amazing journey. And I'm just going to give you the highlights, right? And then we can go through all this.
Okay.
So professional dancer, actor, singer, turned osteopath, academic and researcher. That's 3 lifetimes in one. It's amazing. It's beautiful. You grew up in Ottawa, Canada. We also know each other from working together in The Lion King for many years. I feel like we both started at the same time, didn't we?
It was close to the same time. It might have been around.
Like here in London.
Oh, yes.
You started before me in Toronto.
Yes.
And then you came to London the same time as I did.
Yes.
So we have known each other for 21 years.
I know.
Wild.
Yes.
So wild.
Yes, absolutely. And what a blessing that is.
It is. And what a beautiful time and journey. And you met your husband in The Lion King. And not only that, what I mentioned just now is we used to call you Doc when we were working. And I was trying to think, how did that come about? Do you remember?
Doctor was something that it was a name that was given to me when I would come into your dressing room, and for some reason, anatomy questions started coming up, or like injury questions started coming up, and for some reason, I thought like I had some kind of authority on the subject.
You did. How you really do.
I certainly had an interest at that time, a really keen interest. And then somebody said, it's about the way that I was explaining anatomical interests that someone said, I'm just going to call you doctor.
And then it stuck.
And then it just stuck.
It was foreshadowing, which we will get into for sure. There's nothing more satisfying when you realize in your life you know some phenomenal people. And you're one of those people. Also, always looking good. Always looking good. Like when you won your award, your Rising Star Award that we will also talk about. When I saw that outfit, I was like, oh my God, yes. Always yes. One always representing for the continent.
It's important.
Because you are first generation Canadian, but from Ugandan heritage. So always, and look, again, looking good. Always looking good. I love it. All right. I asked you a couple questions before we started.
Sure.
And one of them was, what did you want to be when you grew up? And you wrote, which is so, I was reading these things and I heard your voice and also the tone and how you connect things and the way you speak has always been so eloquent. And you were like, I've never been burdened with that question. So that's one piece. And then you said, I always used to think, what an absurd question. So firstly, why did you think that was like, why do you think it's an absurd question or why do you think it's a burden?
Burden is a reflective comment.
Right.
But absurd was the feeling that I felt as a child when asked these questions by random people. So the absurdity was, how can I know what the universe has in store for me? I mean,
so from young, you always had that kind of mindset.
It was just an instinct. It was an instinct that how could I possibly enforce my will? Like knowing what I want to become when the universe is so complex and we don't know what's coming around the corner. This is an instinctive feeling. So obviously I can put it to words now through the term that I used just then, which is burden. Because if you ask someone what you want to do when you grow up, suddenly you're holding them accountable for something that can be that there should be allow for flexibility or
I'm so glad you actually wrote that because that's one of the things personally for me that when I was younger, because the dancing was very obvious and the talent was very clear, that suddenly it became a thing. And by the time I finished Ailey, I felt a little bit burdened by my whole identity is wrapped up in this dancer thing.
Yes, absolutely.
And even my sister, and I think, I'm sorry, sis, you're going to hear this, but I think childhood, my sister's ridiculously intelligent, has one of those obscenely huge brains. And everyone, all the adults in our space kept on saying, you're going to be this, you're going to be that, you're going to be this. And I personally, this is purely my speculation, I think that paralyzed her in a way of being able to really go for what she wants in certain aspects, because then suddenly it's like, what if you aren't that thing?
Yeah, yes. And also it becomes, people start to take ownership of it.
Yeah.
When actually it's always should be about the joy and curiosity and impulse. That is what guides you to whatever it is that you're going to be when you grow up. As though it's a final stage as well.
As if we're ever going to grow up.
Exactly, and that's another absurdity. Grow up. What does that even mean? And so I think really I just had this understanding that as long as I enjoy something and I'm in that state of enjoyment and curiosity, then it doesn't matter what I do when I'm grown up or when I'm growing.
So would you suggest a change to the question?
No, I think actually it's quite a provocative question.
And I guess now that we're adult and we've grown,
that
it's a little easier, right? Because you can be, I used to think I wanted to be an astronaut, but now I'm not.
I think I really enjoy the question because it's an open question. And it almost is a phrase that I don't know if I hear very often now. Because I feel as though generationally there was this idea where you grew up and you have this one career at the time, and that phrase is used very often.
Yeah.
And so asking someone what they want to do when they grow up felt like a phrase that was linked to that time and the mind frame.
That's true.
Nowadays I feel like people are trying different things in their careers, and they feel free enough to do it. And so really it doesn't feel like it applies to a contemporary mindset and paradigm.
That's so true. See, I knew you would be an amazing guest. We are in it. So speaking of impulse and going where you went, you started dancing professionally at 16.
Yes.
That's young even in super talented people's realm. How did that happen? And also coming from an African family where there's certain expectations, and I was asked this question, your parents just let you dance? When you African father as well, who was in medicine, etc. How did that kind of play? Like the family aspect, and you going out into the world and traveling the world.
Yeah, I think we were all, it was like the rug was pulled out from underneath us, because I didn't actually expect that to happen.
What, being professional at 16?
Yes. Right. I was just dancing and performing, and things that kind of were presented to me. I just thought it's just another extension of what I enjoy doing. And I don't think I had the mind frame to be burdened by the responsibility of professionalism.
Yes, at such a young age.
It was just this cool thing that came up to go to Orlando, to go to New York. But in hindsight, I'm sure my parents were bewildered by it because it all happened so quickly.
Right. Okay.
And it was unexpected. Yes, sure, it was one thing for me to always be that child amongst the Ugandan community, first on the dance floor at the Christmas parties, doing my choreography with my cousins. But it's a whole other thing to be out in the wide world.
In a whole different country.
Accepting a paycheck while in school to be doing something similar. So I think they were bewildered, excited, but I'm sure they saw the signs before it happened.
Right. So they weren't surprised at all. They were like, he is doing what he's supposed to do.
I like to think that's what they were thinking.
And they always supported you, didn't they?
They did. They were extremely supportive. I was very lucky to have such a supportive family and parents. I think from what I was told, in their younger adult life, they were also into the arts as well. And they might have forayed into some acting themselves while at university. So I think they had an intrinsic understanding of that artist spirit.
I think my mother definitely, she was like, I always wanted to be a dancer. So if you could do it, why not? And it's so funny because there is that trope of African parents wanting to do one of the typical professions. But actually, when I really think about all the people that we've come across in our years at Lion King and all the different black and brown folks and all the
Yes.
different African parents.
Yes.
A lot of us came from
Yes.
families that you would think would have that typical trope, but all of us were there, and there were a lot of us. So maybe
Yes.
it's not as tropey as we think.
Yeah, perhaps. And I think when there is evidence of success that can be measured quantifiably, might I say, from a parent's perspective,
Yeah, making a paycheck definitely helps.
I think that sort of settles their mind.
And it's so funny as well, because when I switched careers from stage into operations, I'll never forget one day my mother was, I don't know what you do now. She was like, it was so clear that you used to be a dancer and you used to be in the show, but now she's, I'm so confused. And I thought, I've gone to the more typical way of life and now you don't get it? It's all good. And I think it's interesting, the journeys that we take. But speaking of journeys, you started dancing professionally at 16 and you've traveled the world. Along the way, you must have learned a whole bunch of shit, lessons upon lessons. What are some of those in your early years and career that you may have learned that have informed your current career as an osteopath, which we will obviously get into? But do you think of anything, especially in that 16, 17 year old time?
Yes. That's such a great question. And I'm just recalling so many memories that relate to my sense of identity that was really brought to the fore when I was outside of Canada working and around other people of the same skin tone as me that were not from Canada. It was very comforting, but then also very jarring, because the way that I was being perceived by other people who share the same skin tone as me, but somehow saw me as different.
And it's just that both of you are different.
Exactly.
And like, to you, they're different.
Yes.
Yeah.
So it was really a very eye-opening lesson in terms of how I am perceived as other, both within my own community, but then also perceived as other in the wider context. And so it was a really important lesson for me in terms of forming my sense of who I was as an artist, and also my identity just as a person going out in the world. I think at the time, at 16, I up to then, I can now say I obviously lived a very rather sheltered life in terms of thinking, perhaps it was through my own naivete and ignorance, thinking that everyone was the same. Everyone was equal. Everyone had the opportunities to follow their bliss and to enjoy and be curious. And it wasn't until I was working away from home that it really came to the fore how different I was and how unique that experience was. And so I really began to learn to value the importance of those gifts that were my differences.
And you, as someone who has spent a lot of time with you, and in some difficult situations, in some joyous situations, like tired to the bone, all sorts, many drunken nights, and all of it. We've experienced those amazing, crazy, informative those 20s, those like, and living and being able to do what we all love to do in a city like London, but also getting paid really pretty well, frankly. And all of that, I think your uniqueness always shone through, and in a really tangible way. Like, whenever you were around, there was always, also connected to the doctor piece, but there was always a kind of, I always felt safe when you were around, even when we were doing some mad ass shit. I was like, if Arthur's here, look, it's okay. It'll be okay. Nothing will ever go too far. You always had this really calming yet safe, secure, comforting, and you still do. And I haven't seen you in a few years, actually, right? I don't know. I don't even know how to describe it, but you're one of those people that I think, I always wish Arthur would fall in love with me.
So special to hear. I think that is so special to hear. And I'm so grateful for you explaining that to me, because obviously my lived experience at the time, was fully aware of the responsibility that I carry being myself. And it's something that I try to, I'm sure we'll get onto this later, instill in a number of my students, if not hopefully all of my students, is this idea of showing up and being present, and the responsibility and obligation you have to be fully yourself, and not knowing how being yourself, being authentic and showing up is going to affect the people around you. I think it's something that I don't take lightly, hence the reason why, as you mentioned before, in terms of what I'm wearing and what it's projecting, I think it's really important to just be yourself, and that your signature you.
You've definitely got a signature. Speaking of being yourself and being authentic, you've lived in multiple places. You've worked in multiple shows, so not just Lion King. I know we only mentioned it because that's where we worked. But you've done Cirque du Soleil. Mm-hmm. You are also a fantabulous singer. You're an actor. You've done so many things in the theater space. So you're used to being vulnerable and sharing. Yet there's still this mystery about you. There's this really nice mystery, which is great. And I don't know how you do it. It's fabulous.
But I think that's an African trait. It might also be a Caribbean trait as well.
Possibly.
I think it's very cultural.
Yeah, maybe.
I don't know. Yeah. That's just my opinion.
Yeah, but I think you own it, and you own it very well. Thinking about all the things that you've been and done and all the people that you've met, have they been any, along the way with all that learning, what are some of the things that really solidified how you show up as yourself?
Another really great question. Wow. Okay. I think it comes down to that first experience, as we were talking about before, when I was 16, and the repetitions of that figure, or those figures in my life that reminded me of difference and celebrating difference. And different phases in my career, it might have been colleagues, or it might have been friends that reminded me of my difference. And perhaps the intent wasn't always meant to be supportive. The intent sometimes was meant to be malicious, or perhaps there was sort of confusion around these reminders, these comments around what I was bringing to the table. But I always think there's a lesson in everything. I always have. What is this moment here to teach me? I'm from that generation. Mm-hmm. To put it into context, growing up in Ottawa, watching Oprah Winfrey, Eckhart Tolle, Power of Now, A New Earth, even reading a lot of works around Thich Nhat Hanh's Taoism and Buddhism as a teenager, really invested in that kind of world of present-mindedness and accepting the moment. So that was my foundation. So anytime these figures would come into my life and reminded me of my difference, might be through rejection in auditions.
Yeah.
And then the commentary, you should go and do this. Why are you coming to audition for this sort of thing? Reminded me, actually, these are things that I need to celebrate. These are not things I need to hide away or things that I need to be shy of. So I think it really comes down to that seed when I was 16 and 17 working abroad, but then also that foundation of Buddhism and of course, Oprah Winfrey, Eckhart Tolle. These were the sort of figures that helped me along the way.
I don't know why. As you said, Eckhart Tolle, I feel like at one point, either you shared the book with me or I shared the book with you. You probably shared the book with me.
I came across a lot of spiritualism and mindfulness and meditation when I was in high school. I was fascinated by it.
How did that come about?
I was quite a bookworm, but thankfully I went to an arts high school surrounded by similar minds or interests. And my longtime friend introduced me to Eckhart Tolle at the time. But I was with a community of people that would be reading these sort of things anyway. And so that was my foundation, and that what really fostered my outlook on life, and how now I really can dive into that practice of just presence and accepting the moment and being authentic and showing up as yourself, but then also letting things go.
And that makes a lot of sense now to me. Meeting in our early 20s and you having that kind of, you were just so centered.
Oh, it was my grounding.
You were so centered, and that makes so much sense now that you've been that was your way of life, and you've been practicing it.
Absolutely.
Since you were a young teenager. Absolutely. And here we were like going, wow! What's happening? And in fairness, I wasn't even that bad. I was probably one
No,
of the
you
more
weren't.
centered,
Yes.
sensible ones as well.
Yes.
But it was funny just also observing it, because even I was like, there's someone who is way more centered than me. Dancing, acting, singing, they're all part of the arts that require heavy discipline to be good at. They're all talents that everyone has to some degree,
Yes.
but doesn't mean you're good at it. But you have mastered all three of the performing arts that require a lot of vulnerability, and to be physically at your peak, and to be able to deliver day in, day out, no matter what's going on in your life. All of that kind of high performance. With all of that, having such a long career, how do you sustain that high level, that peak performance that, frankly, I've never seen you falter? And I was your dance captain. And I was like, you were one of those people I didn't even pay attention to on stage in that sense, because Arthur knew what the deal was. He would deliver. Thea and I used to talk about you all the time. But we used to talk about the fact that having you in that cast and working on that stage, back to that comfort piece, it was one of those things where there were so many other things that we had to pay attention to and chop and change and look at, and all these other things going on, that it was just really nice sometimes to be like, oh, I want to see something that I know is going to make me smile or look beautiful. And then we look for you on the stage and be like, oh,
Wow.
nice. You were that moment, that breath of, oh, lovely. So all that to say, your consistency, being a mindful person, the consistency that you sustained, like, how did you do that? And also, it's proof in the pudding because of your new career now.
Thank you very much for sharing that with me. I've always wanted to dive into each of those disciplines separately. I first thought I was going to be an actor, and dancing came by accident. It was accidental.
I'm so surprised to hear that.
And as far as music and voice, classical performance, really wanted to understand the craft separate from any of the other disciplines. And so there's always been an awe and admiration and respect and wonder about each of the disciplines as a craft. And so it was through that understanding and wanting to know more and curiosity that really just was the vitality and lifeblood of how I was able to keep going in those fields. It wasn't enough for me to be in a role or in a play where I'm singing a solo, that I really wanted to understand everything that has to do with soloistic singing. So of course I was going to enroll in university in a vocal classical performance degree. Actually, this was at University of Nevada.
Okay.
In Las Vegas, because I needed to know what were the underpinnings of this work that I'm doing. And so the more I dived in, the more I wanted to dive in. And even in those moments, again, I've been reading a book by, I've forgotten, he's a book called Experience in Education. And in this book, this author, is quite a famous book, it'll come to me in a moment, talks about purpose and how you are able to achieve purpose, whether it be within a given moment, or whether it be a long period of time or a short period of time. And the key elements that he talks about are, first, there being an impulse and recognizing that an impulse is present and there and needs to be acted on. But then there's also the skill of observation, observing that there are consequences to an impulse. And if the consequences are favorable, if there is a certain degree, I'm not saying this myself, but the author says, a certain degree of intellect and know-how, then actually you begin to observe a behavior that continues to give you purpose. And so if you act on impulse and you observe consequences that are favorable, why not continue to find your purpose in that moment? And so that's what I think really articulates what those moments are when I'm in performance that you're talking about, is if I follow an impulse of movement or follow an impulse of voice and singing that is resulting or is giving fruits or resulting in favorable consequences, then surely using my intellect, it would mean that I should continue to find purpose in that moment. And so that's what drove me doing simple things like swaying from side to side or singing a bass line, is that I found real purpose in that moment. And it was, again, the present moment that really I found quite exciting.
Man, just like, it's weird. I have to remind myself to be talking about the present, like to not get lost in listening to you. Because but also that's the thing about your voice. You have this like really amazing, like easy on the ears voice. I'm like, So.
Oh, that's so funny. Small anecdote. I did a radio show when I was, I think, 14.
Not surprised.
And it was by accident. Again, people were looking out for me. I had some angels in my life. And it was a morning show, and we had callers coming in, and I'm a teenager. We had some adult women calling in, commenting, you know where I'm going with this, on my voice in the morning.
They're like, he's getting me up in the morning.
Meanwhile, I don't think they knew how old I was. I don't know where this voice came from.
You just mentioned you have lots of angels, and you've had lots of angels or have lots of angels in your life. What are some of the things that those angels have brought to your space?
This is something that I get quite emotional thinking about, because we don't always know how much of a community is around us, just gently nudging us in the right direction. It's those people making decisions on your behalf without you in the room that have your best interest at heart.
Yeah.
But our educators, our teachers, our guidance counselors, our friends, our bosses, our colleagues that want to see us be more of ourselves and thrive, that put me in positions that I could never have found on my own. So I didn't seek out this radio show. It just, one day, somebody called my home and asked if I'd be interested. In the same way that me falling into this professional career, I wasn't seeking these auditions. It was as though somehow I was guided towards something that was happening, or an interest. People were looking for someone, and my name was put forward.
I think we all have those people in our space. And I think, and I'm sure you are that for other people as well. And you mentioned your students earlier. You've danced, you've done the thing. We all know that our career is limited and limiting. And also, frankly, them hours are not social. And as we get older, we don't want to go to the club after work. We want to go to dinner at 7 and not be starting work. You made a transition. And so now you're teaching students. So tell me a little bit about this current career where you're still my doctor, but you're not quite a doctor, but I know that you are an osteopath. And I know you went and you've got all these other degrees behind you. You received the Rising Star Award from the professional body of osteopaths in the UK. Give me that kind of picture. How did we end up doing what you're doing now?
As like most things, it was an organic transition. I could have kept going.
I think you could have too.
But interests and curiosity were leading me in different direction, more and more. That balance with all the things you're talking about in terms of appreciating other elements relating to quality of life and the kind of what you value changes as you get older. Relationships change as you get older, what you want from relationships, what you want to put into relationships. And all these things started to begin to influence the change, organic change. The curiosity in terms of anatomy and movement and body work has always been a theme, certainly in terms of the crafts that I studied within the arts, but more biologically and physiologically speaking, that's always been an interest of mine. So I just happened to start teaching at the Royal Central School of Speech and Drama through...
How do you just happen to start teaching, and what were you teaching?
Again, I think I was recommended as a possible candidate for this job position by a mutual friend of ours. I don't know if it was this person.
Okay. Oh, you suspect. Okay.
But I suspect it's a gentleman named Oliver Liddard. who
He
was
would do that.
associated with that program at the time. And so I found myself in a position, a visiting lecturing position, that really was a combination of all these things that I enjoyed, which was anatomy, biomechanics, movement, exercise, physiology, and exercise science. And so that really began to foster that early seed of interest and really encouraged me to continue studying this world of biomechanics. And so I started to go into sports massage and manual therapies, body conditioning training, and I wanted more and more, which is a common theme. If I'm interested and I'm curious and it gives me joy, why not do more? And so I ended up in a position where I was working in multidisciplinary clinics alongside working within the theater world as well, because I couldn't just do one thing in my life, could I?
Because why would you?
I don't multitask. But I was working in multidisciplinary clinics alongside chiropractors, alongside other massage therapists, physiotherapists. And I really thought this world was really interesting because it supported my personality type, which is very introverted anyway. So this one-on-one connection with people. But it really was calling forth my interest in anatomy and fascination with the human body and human form. And so I wanted to be able to deliver more to these clients at the time that really were gaining a lot from this manual therapy treatment that I was giving them. And so I was looking at all these courses at the time. I think I was working in a play, Regent's Park, and I needed to find a course that was going to be able to be flexible enough where I can do this play, Regent's Park, also work in multidisciplinary clinics as well. It was just more of a logistical kind of question that the answer was osteopathy at the University College of Osteopathy.
How does osteopathy answer I understand what you're saying, like their schedule work with my schedule.
Yes.
But it's osteopathy.
Yes.
It's not creative writing.
No, it's not.
I love that it was an answer to logistical questions.
Yes, this is in a nutshell. This is summarizing weeks and months of research, of listening to podcasts from these various disciplines, physiotherapy, chiropractic, osteopathy, understanding what language they use. Do I resonate with their language? What are their views and philosophy of health? Does it resonate with me? Do I share those same views? What's the evidence base behind these professions? Because I knew I wanted to become a first healthcare provider. Because as a massage therapist at the time, and as a VL, a visiting lecturer at Central, I felt very much a alternative or a supportive service or provision to clients or students. But I wanted to be at the first point of call. I knew I had the capacity to offer more.
Yeah.
And so that's why I was looking at this other range of musculoskeletal health professionals. And it wasn't until I was listening to a podcast by Dr. Oliver Thompson called Words Matter that I really began to gain traction with osteopathy. It really felt like it was something that I connected to in terms of how my own demeanor, my position, my outlook on life and outlook on health. And in terms of answering the logistical question, it really just became a question about how is this going to fit in my week?
Yeah.
And what course offers me the ability to continue studying while
connects with what you're doing.
Connects with what I'm doing while living this theater dream in London.
And I don't know, something just tells me as well that even if it didn't work, you would have gone in there, had a conversation with them and convinced them to make their schedule work for you. Because you are also someone that when you decide you're doing something, you're going to do it and you're going to do it well. Hence, Rising Star Award.
But that came out of nowhere.
Not as someone who knows you. That did not come out of nowhere. Frankly, I would have been surprised if it didn't happen. But why do you feel like it came out of nowhere?
Because, Zara, oh gosh, when it's almost as though when you are so enthralled by the work, whatever it is that the work means to you, that is all encompassing, it's almost as though the blindfolders come on and you can't see what's happening outside of your work. And the danger in that sometimes is that it can be a bit of an echo chamber and you can be at risk to this kind of internal chatter of doubt, fear, or anxieties rooted to your ability to produce the work you want to produce. Meanwhile, things are still happening on the
People are observing
outside,
you.
which I had no idea at the time. And this was another example of angels, because when I got that email, I didn't believe it. I didn't believe it
Wow.
for months.
So who confirmed it then? How did you end up believing it?
Even at the time, like I think it might have been the week before when I finally got the invitation of what was meant to happen at this awards ceremony, I said to my husband, I think this might actually be happening.
So I better look good. And you did.
The way it came about is I was nominated for this award.
Yeah. Do you know who nominated you? Another
There
angel?
was a group of faculty and staff at the University College of Osteopathy that voted. And I had no idea that firstly, that it even existed. I think I might have seen in my periphery in a magazine
that this thing exists.
That it exists, but it wasn't part of the work that I was trying to create.
There's a couple things there for me. It's one, I think that's one of the beautiful things about people who love what they do. That getting enthralled with what you're doing and not paying attention to things. Yes, it could be an echo chamber, but at the same time, you're not being distracted and you can give your absolute best. But also, what about osteopathy enthralled you so that you didn't even realize that you were being recognized and being observed? And that award is for commitment and determination and excellence to the field.
Yes, yeah.
So you started doing clinics, which we also need to get to because you have your own venture now. But what about osteopathy? Am I saying that right?
Osteopathy, yes.
Osteopathy.
Yeah.
Put the O in a different way. Osteopathy. What about it enthralls you?
It's this total view and appreciation of health that I feel as though it doesn't resemble anything reductionist in my view. They're principles that appreciate how different systems within the body are self-organizing in order to be able to produce health. And health between you and I can be different. And the other aspect of osteopathy is that there is this real genuine alignment to other components of health, psychological components of health, sociological components of health, alongside this biological influence and how we see ourselves as healthy individuals. And how that interplay can be facilitated through a one-to-one interaction with another human being, through narrative-based reasoning, so story.
Okay.
And how story comes across in clinical interaction. So it's a really wide-ranging, comprehensive view of how you can enter this field of musculoskeletal healthcare, because that is the scope of the position. But there is this appreciation for all these other aspects of what makes an individual healthy. And
which is how most medicine should look like, right?
Absolutely.
I feel like GPs, like that's what you need to do, but they really don't. But it's the thing that you love about it, right?
There's a wonderful model that's inherent in a lot of osteopathy consultation, which is time. That we have a degree of and flexibility of time, which at the moment in the UK, a number of GP surgeries don't have that privilege.
Yeah.
And it's not for want of them wanting more time with their patients, it's just because of the demand at the moment.
Yeah.
And
how does osteopathy have time versus general practice? Is it because it's considered more specialized?
The majority of osteopathy, although now we're seeing more and more osteopaths populating national healthcare provisions in the NHS, but in the UK, osteopathy is the majority of it is within the private medical, private health sort of field.
Right.
These are
referrals
and
people
private
who have private insurance.
Exactly. Yeah. And so because of that, we have flexibility of increasing our consultation appointment from what you might get as a 15, 20-minute consultation with the GP to 30 minutes, 45 minutes, an hour. And
which makes all the difference.
Which makes all the difference. And so that's where I find this idea of narrative-based reasoning in this clinical interaction can really flourish because people are able to tell their stories. And I find that so special. And you can see, knowing my background, why I'd find that so
Fully.
fascinating and enthralling and also important for people to have the space to share their experiences with pain and discomfort with someone who has the time to listen.
Your patients are so lucky. Like, how do I become a patient of Arthur Kyeyune? No, I'm dead serious. What are some of the things that someone would come to see you for?
Okay, to answer your first question, you might come and see me at my 2 clinics at Osteo Arke.
Where are they?
I have one clinic in central London, I'm in Soho, and then I have another clinic in an area called Beckenham, which is more sort of suburban London. But
Arke is your clinic, though, right?
Osteo Arke is my clinic.
Congratulations.
Thank you. It felt like the right thing to do at the time.
Why did you decide to build your own clinic?
A number of different things, balancing where I am in my life, the flexibility and the ability to be able to direct that it allows me, direct as in ideas and outlooks and philosophies, and really a mandate in terms of how I want to promote health in my community. That felt like the best vehicle for me to be able to do that. And it just felt right. It felt like that was the right thing based on my experience, life experience, as well as my training. It was time.
Yes.
To answer your second question, the sort of people that would come to see an osteopath, or how does one see an osteopath?
Yeah, or just want to see you because you will be phenomenal at it. I'm sure there's lots to fix on me.
It's interesting because around the world, there are so many different types of osteopathy with different specialisms. In the UK, comparatively to Europe, osteopaths in the UK really are a breadth and variety of very biomechanical, musculoskeletal focused osteopathy, or osteopaths that specialize in visceral osteopathy, visceral health, gut health. And then there's a school of osteopaths that specialize in cranial osteopathy. So this idea of the nervous system being bathed in cerebral spinal fluid up from around the brain, down the spinal cord into the sacrum, and how that through gentle mobilization that can be influenced in terms of improving health.
Wow.
And then there's a real sort of emerging school of osteopathy that really heralds and champions evidence-based and evidence-informed treatment interventions. And what that means is that if you are an individual that is looking for a health professional that you can discuss your bodily, physical health issues, we might be, if not geared to discuss anything related to musculoskeletal health, but certainly be an individual that can refer you onwards after appropriate screening and safety protocols. There isn't, as long as it has to do with something physical in terms of physical health, chronic pain, discomfort, chronic fatigue, all the way to headaches, neck pain, back pain, to really acute injury, there is an osteopath in the UK for you.
Wow. Well, know that you're about to be my osteopath.
Okay.
I mentioned, so you have students as well. I want to get into that as well. So you have students? What? You have a clinic? I'm not surprised that you're teaching, because that is also your soul and your spirit and your nature. But what do you teach? Do you teach osteopathy?
Yes. Again, accidental teacher.
You're going to make people listen to this be like, what is my life?
The idea is that really you can call it whatever you want. You can call it teacher. You can call it osteopath. You can call it academic. The point is there are common themes in each of our lives. There might be job titles that people might ascribe to it. Podcast presenter or business owner. But ultimately, at the core of that, there is something fundamental or a fundamental drive that is calling to and is speaking about. The reason why I say accidental teacher is because I've always enjoyed connecting to a group of people. I've always enjoyed inspiring, motivating the moment of understanding within other people. So it just so happens that there is an occupation called a teacher or an educator or a lecturer,
Yeah.
that people ascribe to it. But really, that's what I'm doing. And at the moment, I'm in this position as a lecturer in osteopathy at the University College of Osteopathy.
Okay.
That was accidental because I was minding my own business, as I do.
But also doing it well.
Oh, but
So
hopefully doing it well to my
someone's
standards.
paying attention. Yes.
Not even interested in, not even knowing because I hadn't graduated yet. Just looking into the outside world, being like, what's going to come? And then I got an email saying, before you go
inbox.
out into the wide world as an osteopath, just so you know, there's this position coming up. Would you consider coming in to be interviewed? And I just thought, well, I mean, at that point, I had 9 years of lecturing experience already. I just figured if somebody comes knocking at the door, then maybe you should answer it. Maybe you should answer it and see.
And you know what? It's going to go one of two ways. It's going to be exactly what you need, what you want for now, forever, for its season.
We'll see.
Or it's going to be a thing that you're like, maybe not. And then you close the door and you'll be like, okay, no regrets.
Absolutely.
You explored it.
You
You did it.
Yes.
And it didn't work out. And you move on, right?
And of course, because it is something that I'm interested in at the moment and I'm curious about, it's leading to me doing my
More
current
research.
postgraduate certificate in clinical and academic education, which means that it's a situation where I want to understand the craft.
I feel like when we spoke about this a while ago and you were telling me about your degree, there was also a specialism that you were doing that wasn't necessary, or you were combining it with another outlook. Did I make that up?
I don't know.
Were you working with patients with HIV or something?
Oh, yes. So that is yes. And gosh, how eye-opening it is. That's an opportunity that luckily this university program is able to afford to their students. Is as they advance into seniority as a student, you can begin specializing by going to these clinics. And they have special clinics called the Blanchard Clinic, where patients with HIV can come and really be treated and guided by the student-led clinic. Also, there's a GP surgery as well, which luckily I was also involved in as well. And really, it was a wonderful opportunity for me to be able to have specific exposure to a community of patients with very specific needs that really inspired my motivation and outlooks of what I want my own business to represent and who I want to be able to serve, what communities I want to serve.
That's what I was going to ask. Has that informed what Arke is doing? And actually, what is... every company has its mission statement, its vision. What is that for Arke?
Yeah, so it's really about trying to establish a community that feels as though osteopathy is for everybody. That everyone is included. And I'm speaking specifically to those communities that might feel as though they are not invited. And so really it's about osteopathy for everybody. Really.
Good.
Which I think is important.
Would you consider doing a osteopathy, Osteo Arke podcast? We've already established the voice. You clearly have the experience from when you were 14. Would you consider giving that to the community, especially for people, because as you said, it's, for lack of a better phrase, it's a privileged side of healthcare, right? Where it's referrals or it's private healthcare. Would you consider trying to democratize that with just sharing information?
I don't know. It's a good question. I don't know what form it will come. If this is the vehicle that it needs to come in, then perhaps that might happen. It's not something I've thought of.
I think you should think about it.
But to be fair, there are many osteopaths that are working within public health services. So I definitely don't want people to think that
it's
it's not just private healthcare, but it is accessible through the NHS. And we are allied health professionals, which means that you're seeing more and more of us within public health systems in the UK.
Good.
Which is very different from standings in Canada or in the States for that matter, or in some countries in Europe. But really, it's a growing field internationally speaking, but certainly in the United Kingdom, it's very well established.
Nice.
Yes, osteopathy is accessible.
Good.
Absolutely.
Speaking of accessibility and kind of the growing bit of it. Where does this go? Is osteopathy and developing that field, is that kind of what you see yourself focusing on? Or do you think that you have the capacity or even the brain space to go, oh, I'm going to sharp left at this point? Do you think it'll just like...
Interesting. You never know. Watch the
well,
space.
Exactly, the way you are, I feel like you're going to create a brilliant clinic. I'm sure it's brilliant already, but I feel like it's going to have great depth and grow. And then there will come a day where you have probably staffed up and trained people and developed a brand that you're then like, you know what, I'm going to go back to classical singing.
Yes.
You know what I mean? Or you would suddenly be like, let's do this author thing. Because I could also see as an author.
I see. Yeah. I think that's the lesson of it all, isn't it? And that's what more and more studies are coming out in terms of longevity and vitality. Those are important elements that I think we can all practice. And it's a privilege to be in a position to be able to follow your curiosity and follow passion. And I think that's what keeps life really exciting, is thinking about the answer to that question. Because right now I have no idea. Maybe. How exciting is that?
And I'm sorry to your husband if I just planted a seed. I still love you, Mr. Husband. We're not throwing names out there. But I don't know. There's something. I also wanted to ask you about, you are in a space that, from what I am aware of, is a little bit melanin deprived.
Oh.
And you are also unique and all of that. So in this space, you're adding to that. Am I correct in assuming there's not necessarily a lot of black and brown osteopaths out there?
Absolutely. Yes, and not just in the professional sphere, but also within the educational sphere. And that's an important part of what I'm doing and why it is that I'm in this profession, and also in this position as an educator as well. Because, absolutely, there are not enough of us that are standing up and being counted for. I think that growing up in Ottawa, navigating predominantly white spaces is certainly not foreign to me. It's something that, it's a skill that I have just learned.
Because you have to. Survival.
You have to. Absolutely. It is about survival. And so it's something that I experience every day of my life, including those situations like at that award ceremony.
What happened?
Where
this is for your Rising Star Award?
This is the Rising Star Award. It was another example of what it's like to be other, knowing that you represent a global majority, but in this space, it feels as though that isn't the case at all. You are a minority in that space. It was the reception ceremony, the award gala dinner, where it was a room full of international osteopathic delegates, and they were announcing the winners of each of these awards. And when it came time to announce the Rising Star Award, the host started stumbling through my name. And I just think in that moment, there was an inner eye roll, but then there's also that moment of just feeling like stone.
Yeah. Also, because it's not acceptable.
Of course it's not acceptable.
Like, not today.
No, I just think that's really, it was really unfortunate, but it was another reminder of what my role is. It was a reminder of why it was important that I was there, wearing what I was wearing, accepting that award, and how it's going to drive my research and how it's going to drive my purpose going into this new career and new industry. Again, it's just turning, we spoke about earlier in our conversation about these moments of individuals that remind you of your otherness. I see that as a blessing.
And using that.
And using
motivator.
it. Thank you for exampling, modeling the behavior that I'm researching. I need to look into why it exists and what are the best practices to be able to allow for that not to happen again.
Yeah. That's good. And honestly, so when something like that happens, how do you then not go on that stage and punch him in the face? Walk, as I know you would have, gracefully, and continue extending that grace to this person who has no excuse and that's just plain laziness, frankly, and ignorance. But when you're walking in these spaces where you are, as you say, representative of the global majority, but in that space you feel very minoritized, do you have any kind of tools that you've drawn to know, keep going? Other than it being your fueling your purpose and a motivator in that moment, what does Arthur do in that moment?
Arthur is no longer Arthur. Arthur is a product of a community of Ugandans.
Yes. The ancestors visited.
I just feel like I'm no longer myself. This moment is bigger than me. And so it's almost out of body. It does feel that way. And I think that's so important because I have no idea how that moment is going to reverberate beyond that moment, whether it be through magazine, through this podcast, through imaging that will connect with other people. I have no idea what the consequences are for that individual, or indeed for other people who are in the audience who also witness it happening. All I can be responsible for is how I can be present in that moment, and how the present moment can really bring my authentic self, which I think is a really important sort of takeaway. And my authenticity was who I am and what I represent in a space like that. And I just think it's just so powerful. It's so powerful. So I refuse to see that moment as a unfortunate, lazy modeling of what not to do. I actually see it as a lesson for everyone that was present and there to witness it, but also a motivation for this next chapter in my life.
And of course you would take a situation like that and make it beautiful. That's what you've just done. How you decided to look at it, because I would have just been like, pops! And been like, mother, huh? But no, and thank you for reminding me as well of sometimes, like, while we have all grown up in a space and our navigation of white spaces is what we do and we know how to do it and we do it well, like sometimes I just get really tired and I lose it and I have that moment. But you've just reminded me of the bigger picture and remembering also who's around, who will be affected, all of those other things. So thank you for that.
Oh my gosh. There's so many microaggression stories that I could tell you about.
This country is very powerful with that. Woo! It's wild. You've had this spectacular career, right? And you're doing so many things every day. You are treating people, you're listening to people, you're empathizing, you're vulnerable, you're also hands-on, so that's physical energy. In your everyday, and I don't know if this is answerable, how much of it is gut, heart, and head? Like, how do you navigate through those three things doing what you do?
When I'm in treatment, when you're
in treatment, your daily life, like
see.
When you're in treatment, when you're out of treatment, like, how do you flow through those three things? Because what you do requires those three things. And do you ever cycle through them? Do you even think about it?
Yes, it's certainly it does fluctuate. And this question came up again with one of my patients the other day, and they're commenting on how much of the work that I do is guided by my intuition. And that has a lot to do with experience, I think. Experience of understanding what those voices or what that being in that mode feels like. There are times that I'm very cognitive, extremely cognitive in my research world, in my studies and sort of academic pursuits. Scholarly pursuits is a very cognitive world that I feel quite happy living in. But ultimately, all decisions that I make in my life are always based on heart and gut. I think that really those are voices or muscles that I have always thought were the most powerful, and that I could have always I've always relied on them to make decisions or to follow impulses, and it's got me to where I'm sitting today. So I think I tend to try to balance the two as much as possible. I am a Gemini after all, so there is those two sides to my personality. But certainly I definitely think that living in that sort of gut, heart, intuitive world is a part of my personality type and characteristic, referencing Myers-Briggs. And so that it comes most naturally to me. Yeah.
If someone listened to this podcast and went, I want to do what he's doing, because I think that will happen. You will inevitably inspire someone who's going to listen. If they wanted to become an osteopath, if you could distill it into 5 things you should think about or 5 things to try, what would that be?
Firstly, you should find out whether or not you like people and are interested in people. I think that's key. The next thing I would say is, how do you feel about discussing and talking about people's stories? How are you? Do they interest you? Do people interest you? Again, it goes back to, do you like people, really? If you're worried about this hands-on aspect of osteopathy, don't be.
Why do you say don't be?
Because there are equally really interesting or specializations within osteopathy that don't have anything to do with hands-on treatment. If you're worried about having to touch people, you don't have to.
There's somewhere for you.
Somewhere for you. Yeah, and I think I would just start with that.
Yeah.
I would start with that. I think fundamentally you have to be interested in people. I would also encourage, as a tip, see an osteopath. Get treated
that
by an
experience,
osteopath.
yeah.
And if you can, see an osteopath that you think you might relate to.
Like Arthur Chase.
Absolutely. The thing that clinched the deal for me was when I saw an osteopath in London that happened to be a black man running his own private practice.
There you go.
Yes.
But that's good. Like that,
yes.
I'm happy to hear.
Yes.
You know what I mean?
Yes.
That while you are still unicorn, you have a fellow unicorn out there.
Yes.
And also someone who clearly inspired you
Yes.
and motivated another one. And he has no idea what he's done.
No,
you know what I mean?
No. Oh, yeah, we're out there. We are
Yeah.
out there, definitely.
We're winding down a little bit.
Okay.
But I'm always curious, what gets you out of bed?
Yes. The thing that gets me out of bed, it was the same thing that got me out of bed when I was a teenager, which is body work. Grounding in my body, whatever that looks like. It could have been, at some point, it was a phase where it might have been yoga. At one point, it was meditation. I think at the moment, I'm in a chapter where I ground myself through exercise. I'm in a gym, but ultimately, for a long period of time, it was through vocalization, warming up for vocalization, vocalizing, singing. But it's always been body work that gets me up in the morning consistently. It just has always set me up for the day, and it grounds my sense of self and readies myself.
Yeah.
Mentally, spiritually. It's always been my way in.
Yeah. It's funny. I was one of those people that when I retired from dance, I was like, I'm done in my head. And then after those 10 years, I was like, I'm so done. And now 10 years again, I realize I'm a 10-year cycle person.
Okay.
10 years later, I'm now like getting back into the physicality, as in wake up, be and move. And the other day I did a ballet bar in my kitchen.
Okay.
And I was like, oh.
Okay.
You forgot, like, what this does for you. And the next day I was like, oh, you forgot what this does to you. But at the same time, it reminded me of how much movement is. And I think, if I remember correctly, you said something that I was like, yes, that's exactly it. I need to remember it. I actually wrote it on a post-it saying, lotion is motion and motion is lotion.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. It's a balm for the soul. It really is. It's connection with a form, a vehicle that has been with you your entire life.
Yeah.
And every day it feels different, and you get to know what it feels like to inhabit your body every day. And
it's interesting because I think at one point for us, our bodies were machines, right? Like we put so much into it, that I think that was also why I repelled so much. And I just turned away from it because I'd spent 30 years by that time, 30 years of just focusing on this thing and making sure that it was well oiled, high performing.
Yes.
Everything was around making sure this body worked.
Yes.
And then I'll never forget, me and Thea Barnes, we were having a conversation. This was when she had been diagnosed with cancer. She hadn't told anyone yet. I had my sarcoidosis rear its head. And we both at the same time said, I feel so betrayed.
Yes.
Like, we spent, and you know that woman, like, there was not an unhealthy thing that went into her body.
Yeah.
And we were just talking about how much we put into our bodies for it to then betray us and turn on us.
Yes.
And it was like I had to, and I'm only now, so I had my big sarcoid flare in end of 2017. And I just remember going, what the fuck? And then also I'm now on the other side of grieving that, of going, okay, at one point I couldn't walk and talk. From being able to do fouettes and grand jetés and ibongas, that kind of physicality, to I had to take breaks when I was changing my bed linens because I couldn't breathe. It's really interesting that I'm now in a place where lotion is motion and motion is lotion makes sense to me, and I get it. And I'm like, yes, that is now my commitment to myself for the next few months, to just do that, even if it is that I'm just going to turn on some music and dance.
Absolutely, yes. And also important, that realization of how you value, what metric system are you using to be able to use this motion as lotion model or idea. Is it enough to be just breathing with using or feeling the respiratory muscles or
doing
feeling
breath
the rib,
work,
doing breath work? Is that enough of emotion to be able to feel as though you're inhabiting your body? Is that as valuable based on what your experience was? Is that as valuable as doing an ibanga? Is it fair to use that same metric system? So I think it's really, again, underneath it all, underneath that inhabiting the body and underneath the groundedness, is a philosophy of present-mindedness and being present in what in your body. And it's interesting listening to you talk about your experience being in health crisis, or talking about Thea going through a health crisis. It really brings to mind a number of friends who we've lost throughout the years, or we've seen going through illness, or lost a lot of people. Currently, friends and family going through health crisis. It really brings up this idea of what does that look like for them to be able to get up in the morning as their bodies are betraying them, really in a state of almost repelling what their bodies are doing to them. It's a challenge.
It took some serious mental fortitude. I'm not gonna lie. There were days where I was just like, no, we're not doing this. And sometimes I actually physically couldn't get out of bed because of the level of exhaustion and the fact that I just couldn't breathe. And just being awake and having that thought and going, how are we here?
And so what did you do to get up in the morning then?
What I used to do to get up in the morning was I used to have to go back to my why. And I had to think about my why. And I had to think about what happens if I just gave up. Because I also knew that getting up was part of the recovery. And that if I didn't keep on getting up, then one day it would be something that stopped me from getting up, like excessive weight gain. Or luckily, I did all the things that allowed my condition to go back to what they consider manageable. But I don't want to get a lung transplant. Like, that wasn't an option in my head. So it was simple things like, you have to go and drink that fresh turmeric ginger shot that you make. That's all you have to do today. Just go drink that thing to help your body, like, calm down a bit. Make sure you're keeping any inflammation in check. You have to make sure and just touch base with your mother, because she is absolutely panicked, because, this was like, she's such a soldier that for her, not quite knowing what was going on with her baby, and I was very much like, you can't come here yet. I need to deal with this on my own and navigate this and
Yes.
figure out what my baseline is. Because I just knew I couldn't have a lot of people in my space. Like, you have to just message her. Be like, I'm okay. We're moving forward. New day. The other things that I ended up doing to get me out was I am one of those few lucky people that have outdoor space in my flat. And I'd just be like, you're going to go. And we have a bunch of parakeets in my neighborhood, which bird song. And I'll just be like, go look at the birds because you could hear them. Those were the things that got me out of bed on the days when I was like, I can't even walk up two steps without feeling like I'm about to pass out.
Yeah.
And now, being able to do a ballet bar, I go, yes.
Yes.
And it's that excitement of, I'm going to do a dance class again.
Yes.
Like, just for fun. The idea of doing a dance class for fun, which I've actually never done in my dancing life. And yes, while I was there, I had fun, but I was in a dance class because it's my career, it's my training.
Yeah.
So the idea of, I'm just going to go sweat it out and bounce.
Yes.
That's the thing that makes me really excited at the moment. And that's what's getting me up.
I think that is so special. That's such an important part of this idea that this technique called active commitment therapy talks about.
Active commitment therapy.
Yes, ACT. It's a part of a technique, an intervention used primarily within psychology, behavioral psychology. Because all these aspects of what you're talking about within this model relates to either living and approaching your health on an axis. And the vertical axis is where you might be going towards behaviors that are relevant to the inner world, urges, thoughts, and feelings, or relating to your health moving towards the outer world. So how you interact with people or how you interact with environment, whether it be ballet bar at home or interacting with people through online classes. And then the horizontal axis within ACT helps us to understand within your idea of your health whether you're moving towards your symptom experience, as in leaning in to the experience of what you're feeling at that moment, or whether or not on the other side of the axis is moving away, so repelling those sensations. And so much of what you're talking about really holds these ideas of how you're able to begin to feel comfortable with the totality of that experience. As in leaning away, respecting where you might feel like you've got to your limit and stopping at a short class, or perhaps in your description of how you need to deal with things on your own in the beginning, not interacting with that outside environment really helps us to understand what that experience is like for ourselves, and also begins to start to answer this dilemma around betrayal from the body, betrayal in terms of our own health. So it's really useful, but it sounds as though you did that instinctively anyway.
I think there's huge value in growing up as a dancer from that perspective. There's certain things that you tap into, and it's informed so much of my current work and my current career that it's things like the grit, the determination, but also the idea that you can make anything work. Because frankly, we were doing some wild shit. Like, a choreographer will come in and be like, I want you to move like this, and you did it. Like, you would have never, your body might have never done that ever before.
But it has to get
But
done.
now you're doing it, right? And you're doing it with 5, 6, 7, 8. Within 10 minutes, you're doing something completely new that your body's just like, let's do this. And it comes from that trust in your foundation, that trust in your training, that trust in your colleagues, because if you're dancing in an ensemble, or your partner when you're doing partnering work. And I think there's that element when I had my big health crisis, that I just very much, funnily enough, the thing that was betraying me, I turned very much inward to it and went, okay, we need to go top to tail and we need to do a little bit of a body check. And I need to think about what's working, what's not working, and what's going to give and what's going to take. But it was that knowledge that I have done some amazing things with this body. And while it is betraying me right now, I will own it again. And it's that piece that I was like, okay, it's a beautiful part of training as dancers where you're the only person responsible for what's happening on that stage at the end of the day. No one else can dance for you. The buck stops with you. Dancing is just you and a floor that everyone's walking on. And it's you. We need to we could continue talking forever and ever. But did you watch it Inside the Actors Studio?
I have before.
Right.
I have before.
So James Lipton always did these questions that I've always loved, and I always said if I could, I would take them. So I took them.
Okay.
And I always end every interview with them. What's your favorite word?
Universe.
That's a good one. That's a good one.
Universe.
And what's your least favorite word?
Scum. I'm an actor. The first thing that comes to mind. I'm just firing it out.
Ah, yeah. Yeah. I get that. What turns you on?
Oh, yes. Music.
Mm-hmm.
Music.
Mm-hmm. What turns you off?
The cold.
Yes. And it also got really cold in here as well for a minute. What sound or noise do you love?
Voices.
Your voice in particular for me. And what sound or noise do you hate?
I'm not a fan of nails on chalkboards.
I think Andrew Hume said the same thing.
Is that right?
I feel like, yeah. Because I spoke to Andrew on 2 days ago.
Okay.
What's your favorite curse word? I don't think I've ever heard you curse.
I don't really curse.
But knowing the curse words, what would be your favorite?
Okay. For fuck's sake. That says it all. That's learned behavior, though.
I think it's a very useful phrase, frankly. It covers so many things. I use that phrase a lot, actually. If you weren't doing the profession you were doing, what other profession would you like to do?
I keep thinking something having to do with writing.
I told you. I see you as an author. See? Told you. And what profession would you not want to do?
I am terrible. I know I'd be terrible at actually being a professional waiter. I know hands down, the balancing act, the remembering the orders.
It's so funny you say that because after I left Disney,
Mm.
I was like, I need a skill
Okay.
that you could just do. If everything fell down, what could I do? And I was like, I need to waitress or something. I was one of those lucky performers that never had to.
Right.
And so I actually worked at Sophie's for 3 months. And let me tell you,
It's hard.
the hardest thing I have ever done.
I don't know how they do it.
And also to try and not want to not smack people in their face when they're being dickheads.
Oh my
God. Or filleting their food at them. When you just want to put it on the table Bruh.
What was
Most
that
difficult
like? I can
thing
imagine.
I have ever done. I'm glad I did it.
Yeah, okay.
But
okay.
I was just like,
Yes.
It takes a certain kind of metal to do this and to do it well. And there's some that are just phenomenal.
Effortless.
And you're just like, wow.
Yeah.
And they also make or break your meal, right? They make or break your experience.
Absolutely.
It's not anything to be looked at lightly. If heaven exists and whoever meets you at the gates, what do you hope they would say?
Well done.
Yes. Well done. Arthur Kyeyune, thank you so very much. This has been such a good conversation. I've had such a good time. I really appreciate you. I appreciate your time. And I love the fact that I can say I've known you for so long and I look forward to knowing you for so many more.
Yes.
It's a beautiful thing.
Let's do this again.
Yes.
Yes.
Maybe on the beach.
Maybe on the beach.
That's what we need
And maybe
to do.
rum next time.
Yes, we will do the rum next time because now we also know the flow and the vibes,
Exactly.
right? Folks, thank you so much for joining us and have a lovely evening. I will see you again soon. Bye.
That's all, folks, for today's episode of I Do What I Do. Biggest thank you to you for listening and to my guests for sharing their journey. I am Zara Bartels, and a super duper special shout out to the incredible folks that supported me on this creation. Keegan Simon, individual, for my logo and social graphics. Nikolai Labari for my theme music, and Andres Albert for being there and doing all the things while we recorded at TYX Studios in King's Cross, London. Walk good, keep doing what you do. Until next time.